I'm Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we're going to play with some liquid dyes to dye some variegated yarn, starting cold and just seeing what we end up with. The colors that we're going to play with today are DHarma Acid Dyes Oxblood Red, Midnight Blue, Spearmint Breeze, and Teddy Bear Brown. And I'm planning just playing with these colors to see what we can create. No measurement, just letting the colors do what the colors want to do on our yarn. Before we go and take a close look at the yarn we're going to be dyeing today, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Jessica S. Jessica, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. And speaking of our yarn, today we're going to dye 300 grams of Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn. This yarn is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. Let's add on some zip ties to our yarn, which I have not pre-soaked. A lot of the times when I want to dye a more repeating, and I'm not saying we're going to end up with a repeating colorway, but we may end up with something more repeating than what I do a lot. A lot of times when I dye repeating colorway, I prefer to use dry dye powders onto our yarn that is wet versus using liquid dyes. And this is because it's a little easier to spread out the dye powders. You can sprinkle the dyes really lightly and spread it, and it doesn't necessarily start binding to the yarn as fast because you have to dissolve it first. And so that can really help you get good coverage on the yarn in a way that otherwise, actually let's go this way, that otherwise can be a little bit trickier sometimes with liquid dyes, because if you just pour the liquid dyes on, maybe it's going to strike a little bit where you've put it, even if there's no acid in there yet. And this is definitely not me saying, hey, don't use liquid dyes on your yarn to dye variegated yarn. It's just explaining more of why I don't do it sometimes. Especially when the dyes are in 1% stock solutions, because then the dyes are more concentrated. If you want to spread out your liquid dyes, it makes sense to dilute them more, because the more, and I have videos where I've shown this, the more volume you have your dyes dissolved in, the more you can spread it out onto the yarn itself. But we're not going to let diffusion take the wheel today. We are going to add dyes and then manually distribute it through our yarn a little bit. I will be putting on gloves, but for now, and I'm sorry, you can hear my dog barking outside, but for now we've added 16 cups of water to our dry yarn. And because the yarn was not pre-soaked, if I move it aside, there is liquid there, but also the yarn is very much on the surface. And so we'll see how much we're able to move these colors. Because the other thing that's worth noting, some acid dyes will strike really quickly, even with no acid, and others won't. So we'll see what we end up with. All right, I'm gonna start with the Midnight Blue because I have the least of it. There really isn't that much, and I'm bringing it and sort of pouring it across. But you can see that there is a fair amount of pigment. I may add water to the bottle and add this on in the end. But for now, I'm going to use my fingers and work it through. Now the color may not be going through all the layers of the yarn. I can try to lift the strands and move things a little bit to help that color get access to the bottom. But in all likelihood, we're going to have less of the color on the bottom than we do on the top. And you can see how me spreading this out, how big it got, not just by me trying to move it through a little bit. So I guess that's worth keeping in mind as well, because part of me thought, okay, I could do, you know, a little bit of brown, maybe I will do this, but on either side of the blue. But this may spread a little more than I anticipate, because just by working the color through. And again, we may end up with light patches on the other side. That is what it is. But if you're dealing with dry dye powders onto the yarn, sometimes you have a little bit more control, or at least that's how I feel. It doesn't mean that it's that much better or worse. It's just different and a different preference. Because again, we may end up loving what we see right here on this side, but then find we have pastels on the other side, which actually I wouldn't be angry at today. Are we gonna use, yeah, let's use it all. Hope I don't regret that. And so we do have more, a little bit more of some of these colors. If we need to add more color on the other side, then that is an option. But actually with the oxblood, as I try to move it down, you can see that it's darker still at this end where it was poured than it is when I move it towards the brown. And that's because it could be starting to strike a little bit right away. But what I can do is, especially at the end, I can lift the yarn to really try to work that through as much as I can. But this is really, really pretty. Oh, I like flying by the seat of my pants. Okay, I don't have a yarn mop on me today. Ultimately, there's not that much color on my hands. But I do want to bring in our green. Oh, I didn't even think about this when I did this, that it was going to be sort of like brown, blue, brown, red, that the brown's going to separate all the colors. Okay, but this is some Spearmint Breeze, a beautiful, beautiful color. And again, see, look, you can see that white down there. I'm trying to work the color through, but just like when I do yarn lasagna with a dry dye powder, sometimes there's limits to how far you can work it through, and this could work better if I'm able to spread the yarn out even more than what I am. But it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means we may end up with some lighter patches, and well, that's okay. So one other downside of using liquid dyes is that each time I add more dye, we're adding more liquid. So if I wanted to spread one of these colors out more and therefore added more water to it in advance, we'd be raising the total amount of liquid in this pan. And in doing so, it would be making it easier for the colors to spread and blend and not stay where they're put. So that's another reason why, and I'm adding some vinegar now. That's another reason why sometimes I will do this. Oh, funny. That color shifted. That's another reason why I'll do this with dry dye powders instead of using liquid dyes, just because then I have a little bit more control over the volume of water that we have as well. But I'm now, again, trying to work things through. Another thing that I've found over the years is that when things are cold, the colors won't necessarily spread as much as they will when they're hot. So that is something that's worth keeping in mind. And by moving it, hopefully we're distributing these colors really well through. Now this is really pretty. The colors have blended. There's a softness to it. We could have treated this like I do sometimes with shoebox dyeing and lifted the yarn up and bringing it down to sort of blend things together even more. But that's not what I wanted to do today. And for that technique, often I have a lot more water. Actually, no, I have less water. Huh. But I try to keep the dye from spreading. But anyway. I am babbling. My goal was to create something variegated, bright, but also not bright and fun, and to help use up some of these dyes that I have on hand that, you know, I need to use up a little bit more of them because I need to make space for more Dyestocks. So I'm gonna move this over to the stove to start heating things up. Okay, I'm gonna turn the heat on. We're across 2 gas burners on my stove. There are times with techniques like this where I would let it sit on the counter a bit before moving it, because by moving the yarn, if you tilt it at all, that could cause some of the colors to shift and move. And if I just quickly bring it away from the edge, you can see that there's a lot of color in there still, but I'm excited. Part of me is a little sad that I didn't decide to just lift this up and lower it back down just to see what we would get. You never know. You never know what you'll end up with. But I have the colors on hand. We will, gosh, let's wait 15 minutes and then we'll flip the yarn to see if we want to add color to the other side or not. The one other caveat now though is that when things are hot and since we have acid in there, any dye I add on is going to start striking to the yarn faster than what our original round did. And these 4 colors really did spread pretty well onto the yarn. They didn't sort of suck up and stick to the yarn right away, which again is something I have seen. But anyway, I'll see you in 15 minutes. We are nice and bubbly. Let's see. Woohoo. That's looking nice and clear. Cool. Oh, it's always nice to check that before you go ahead and flip the yarn. That way, okay, I saw a tiny bit of red in there. But if you check it first, then you're not gonna have like a big surprise or anything. So things are actually pretty darn good. We have a little bit of some space over here. Okay, I do want to use up the last little bit of blue dye that I have. So this is very, very little pigment that's coming on here. I'm not even really working it through, but man, that looks way bluer than it did before. I mean, maybe I can help it through a little bit. I want to do a tiny bit of brown just in like this one spot. So I added some drops and then I'm quickly moving it through because I don't really want that line there. But you can see that it is paler here. Like we didn't get as much coverage with the browns as we did with some of the other colors. And that is totally fine, but we can just help a little bit. That could end up giving us some harsh lines, but thankfully I think we're okay. It's just about getting to it fast enough. And then again, the red is almost completely empty, but I want to rinse this out too. Because why not use up that last little bit? But again, we're adding a lot of volume. And well, I think there we go. I mean, I feel like that this is a good amount of color. There's going to be a little bit of pastels left, but I'm okay with that because that's just sort of what the colors did. And yeah, I'm going to turn the heat back up a little bit and we're going to let things heat for 30 more minutes because I like things not perfectly pooling, but I did just want to add a little bit of that separation in. We may find areas where it goes straight from red to blue or blue to green, and that's fine. That's also fine, but I'm really happy and excited and I hope you're enjoying this too. So I'll see you in 30 minutes. The timer just went off and I'm not even gonna check because I'm very optimistic that our water is clear. I am gonna remove our yarn though. Ooh, this is pretty. This worked well, and I think it worked as well as it did because the dyes I used were concentrated, which is not what I was talking about earlier in today's video. I was talking about how, okay, if you want dyes to spread, you want to dilute them a little bit more, and things worked out pretty well today, but it doesn't always work out this well. We don't always get this amount of spread. So I guess what I would caution, that just because something works with some colors doesn't mean it's going to work with all colors with the exact same technique. Because had I diluted our colors more here today to add it to the yarn, we would have increased that volume, they would have spread, they would have blended more. We wouldn't have some of the clarity of the mint, and even now we do have some spread of the brown into the mint. We wouldn't have the clarity of the mint and the red, as we do here. And so I guess it's worth keeping that in mind. And the thing that can give you the gut instinct of how the colors are going to behave on the yarn is trial and error. And these monologues that I'm giving you as I'm dyeing yarn are sharing part of my thought process and why I'm not adding more water or why I'm not diluting dyes this time. Because what could happen if I did? That doesn't mean that it would always work the way I think, but this thought process gives me the best chance to create a really pretty colorway that I'm happy with versus be really confused and end up with something that wasn't what I was going for, which does happen to me. I'm happy to share the times I was completely wrong as well. But anyway, I need to let this yarn cool completely so we can wash it. And so I'll see you in a little bit. Usually the cooling takes like a couple hours or something, and so frequently what I do is have just like a bunch of yarn sitting to the side cooling, and then at the very end of the day I wash it all. Or sometimes I wait until the next day. Just being honest, but I plan to wash this tonight because then it'll dry faster. Let's wash the yarn. I feel like I'm having another musical day. I just added some dish soap. Sometimes I do that after I add the yarn. Sometimes I do it before. Depends on my mood. And I'm in a goofy mood right now. And of course, even if I wanted to sing for you, you don't want me to sing for you. Not to mention that YouTube would like claim the video. So that is if they could tell what or where or whatever I was singing. But anyway. Oh man. I wash my yarn in cold water. And in January in Massachusetts, cold water is really cold. The good news though is that the color is staying in our yarn. The zip ties I use all start out as white. These ones are green because I picked green ones to use today, knowing that I was going to add a green color near the zip ties. Lately, I see color transfer like rarely, but it does happen sometimes. So if I'm dyeing a dark saturated color, I feel okay using a darker zip tie. If I know I'm going to do a green, then I'll use a green zip tie that I already have because I like to reuse things as much as possible. But anyway, oh, it's cold. Okay, so sometimes if it's this cold, I won't wash things on the coldest setting. I'll add a little bit of warmth, but for now, the water's clear. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this through my spin dryer to remove the excess liquid and hang it up to dry. Here is the finished yarn. And we have blending of our colors, actually a fair amount, but things stayed put really, really well. And this isn't, again, usually the way that I would use liquid dyes. I feel like normally if I'm going to use liquid dyes, I would maybe do something hand painted on the countertop where I wrap it up in plastic wrap and steam set it. Or I might use a lot more water volume and go for something a little more random. But most of the time, when I dye something like this, I would use dye powders. So it was fun to both use up some Dyestocks that I had in my collection and play around using liquid dyes for a technique that, again, otherwise I maybe would have gone for powders with. Now, my only real regret here is that I did not add more brown. And I think that was one of the colors that I did use up. So I don't think there was more of it to add. Again, I could have gone and mixed more and had more powder. But I wish that that color was a little bit more saturated compared to the green, the blue, and the red. This is totally a solvable problem. Even though the yarn is dry here and I'm filming conclusions, I could take this yarn, pre-soak it again, and go and add more dye. So I'm not limited to, oh, well, this is where it is, because I'm not. Your yarn is only done when you decide it's done. However, I'm probably going to list this in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop, and if you think I should remove it from the shop and over dye it, please let me know down in the comments. Speaking of my shop, The ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop is filled with hand-dyed yarn featured in my videos. It's a great way to help support the content here and get fun yarn at the same time. Sometimes you need to twist yarn up to decide a little bit how you feel about it. Sometimes you may like it better flat. And the other thing is you often don't know how things might look until you go and knit with it. And so the one perk of having not a lot of contrast between the color intensities in this yarn, that means that this could work well and have contrast with either something that is really, really pastel or something that is really, really dark if you wanted to blend it and do some color work. And so if there was a ton of contrast in here, it would be harder to mix this in with something else. So just throwing that out there. Jessica S., thank you again for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope you're going to love the way this yarn turned out. I love how the brown ended up being softer than what I originally anticipated, and I think that it's a really fun colorway. If you would like to learn more about how you can become a last-minute lab partner like Jessica, go and check out the listing in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I'll have it linked down below. As a last-minute lab partner, you'll pick from a list of videos that I've already started filming and dyeing, and then I'll film some shout-outs to you to include in the video. If you have any questions about the process, please send me a message on Etsy. I'm happy to chat with you more about it and clarify anything there. Jessica S., thank you again. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post at least twice a week. We have live streams and all kinds of things on the channel, and you don't want to miss any of it. Thank you so much for watching.